He thought the old man in the parking lot was just another stranger having car trouble. He had no idea it would cost him everything. Marcus Webb was 34 years old and worked the night shift at a distribution warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and lived in a one-bedroom apartment he could barely afford. He wasn't rich. He wasn't lucky. But he was the kind of man who stopped. That night, rain hammered the pavement outside a gas station on Route 40. Marcus was heading home after a double shift when he saw an old man standing beside a broken-down Cadillac, soaked to the bone, hazard lights blinking uselessly into the dark. Most people drove past. Marcus didn't. "You need a hand?" he called out, rolling down his window. The old man squinted at him. "Not looking for charity, son." "Wasn't offering any," Marcus said. "Just a jack and a spare tire." For the next 20 minutes, in the freezing rain, Marcus changed the tire without asking who the man was, where he came from, or why a man driving a car like that had no roadside assistance on speed dial. When it was done, the old man reached for his wallet. "Keep it," Marcus said. "Get home safe." He never asked for the man's name. He had no idea it belonged to Arthur Whitfield, one of the wealthiest men in the Midwest, founder of a shipping empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If a stranger helped you and asked for nothing back, comment "faith in people" below. This story is about to get complicated. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a letter. Thick paper, embossed logo, a request to meet at an office downtown. He almost threw it away, thinking it was a scam. Emma, his girlfriend of 6 years, convinced him to go. The office belonged to the Whitfield Foundation. Marcus sat across from a woman named Diane Reyes, who explained that Arthur Whitfield, the man he'd helped that night, had been quietly observing people for over a year, driving an old Cadillac on purpose, wearing worn coats, testing how strangers treated him when he looked like he had nothing. "He does this every few years," Diane said, "looking for someone to lead a new initiative inside the foundation, not someone with the best resume, someone with the right character." Marcus laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. He was one of 3 finalists. The others had been selected the same way, through small, unremarkable moments where Arthur Whitfield tested what people did when they thought no one important was watching. The second finalist was a hedge fund analyst from Chicago. The third was Preston Whitfield, Arthur's own grandson. Preston didn't hide his contempt when he found out a warehouse worker from Columbus was being considered for a position that could change his family's legacy. "You do realize this isn't a charity case," Preston told Marcus at their first joint meeting, adjusting his cufflinks. "My grandfather built this company from nothing. You unloaded boxes for a living. Let's not pretend we're equals." Marcus said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that some fights weren't worth having with words. Arthur, watching from the far end of the table, said nothing either, but he was watching closely. Over the following months, the 3 finalists were given real responsibilities inside the foundation, reviewing grant applications, visiting community programs, sitting in on board decisions worth millions of dollars. Marcus, who had never sat in a boardroom in his life, studied every night after his shift ended, sometimes falling asleep with paperwork still in his hands. Emma noticed the toll it was taking. "You look exhausted," she told him one night. "Your color's off. You've been holding your chest when you think I'm not looking." "It's nothing," Marcus said. "Just stress." He didn't mention that he hadn't seen a doctor in 11 years. He didn't have health insurance through his warehouse job, and a visit to urgent care once cost him $400 he didn't have. So he did what a lot of people without coverage do. He ignored it and hoped it would pass. This is a real and documented pattern in the United States. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, led by Stanford economist Raj Chetty, found that the richest 1% of American men live roughly 15 years longer than the poorest 1%. And that gap has continued to widen, not shrink, even as medical technology has improved. Researchers pointed to delayed care, chronic stress, and lack of consistent access to doctors as major drivers of that gap. Marcus didn't know the statistic. He was living inside it. If you or someone you love has ever put off seeing a doctor because of the cost, comment, "I understand this," because millions of people carry this same silence. What none of the finalists knew was that Arthur Whitfield had his own story buried under 50 years of wealth. He rarely spoke about it, and the Foundation's official biography skipped straight from his birth to his first shipping contract at 26, as if nothing happened in between. The truth was that Arthur grew up in a two-room house outside Youngstown, the son of a steel mill worker who lost his job when the plant closed. Arthur remembered what it felt like to watch his own father get turned away from a hospital because the family had no way to pay up front, remembered the particular kind of quiet that fills a house when the adults stop pretending everything is fine. He built his empire, in part, to make sure his own children never lived that way. What he hadn't accounted for was that wealth could insulate his family so completely that his grandson would grow up unable to recognize the very hardship that had shaped his grandfather. Diane was the only person at the Foundation who knew this history in full. "He's not testing people to find the smartest one," she told Marcus once, during a quiet moment, between meetings. "He's testing them to find someone who still remembers what he almost forgot himself." Preston, meanwhile, played a different game. He didn't attack Marcus directly. Instead, he quietly suggested to board members that a man with no formal education might not have the judgment to manage a portfolio of charitable investments. He arranged for Marcus to be scheduled for the hardest site visits, the longest hours, hoping exhaustion would make him quit before his grandfather ever had to choose. Arthur noticed. He always noticed. But he stayed silent, wanting to see how Marcus would respond under pressure, not how Preston would explain himself. It got worse before it got better. 2 weeks before the final decision was supposed to be made, an anonymous complaint reached the Foundation's board, alleging that Marcus had falsified travel expenses during his rural clinic visits. Diane pulled the security logs and expense reports herself, staying up past midnight comparing timestamps. What she found was that the numbers had been altered after the fact, subtly, just enough to make an honest man look careless. The edits traced back to a shared drive folder that only 3 people had access to. Preston was one of them. When Arthur was shown the evidence, he didn't call a board meeting. He called his grandson into his study, alone. "You didn't just try to beat him," Arthur said quietly. "You tried to make him a liar so I wouldn't have to make a hard choice. That's worse than losing, Preston. That's cowardice wearing a suit." Preston never admitted it outright, but the complaint was quietly withdrawn the next morning, and the folder's edit history was never mentioned publicly. Marcus never even learned how close he came to being pushed out entirely. Arthur made sure of that. He didn't want Marcus fighting to prove his innocence. He wanted to see if Marcus would keep doing the work even while, unknown to him, someone was trying to destroy his name. Comment: "Keep going, Marcus, if you want to see him make it to the end of this story." Marcus never once complained. He drove 4 hours to visit a rural health clinic the Foundation was deciding whether to fund, sat with families who couldn't afford insulin, and came back with a report so thorough that even the hedge fund analyst admitted it outclassed his own. "He's not doing this to win," Diane told Arthur privately. "He's doing it because he actually cares whether that clinic stays open." Arthur nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I needed to know." 3 months into the process, everything changed in a single afternoon. Marcus collapsed in the foundation's parking garage. He'd been complaining of tightness in his chest for days, brushing it off as stress and lack of sleep. A security guard found him on the concrete, barely conscious, and called an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived, his heart had already gone into a dangerous rhythm. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what 11 years without a checkup had allowed to grow quietly and invisibly. Severe, untreated hypertension that had gone undiagnosed for years, along with early signs of heart disease that, doctors said, could have been caught and managed easily if found sooner. Emma sat in the waiting room, shaking. Arthur Whitfield, informed immediately by Diane, canceled his afternoon and drove to the hospital himself. Comment: "He doesn't deserve this if you're rooting for Marcus right now, because the story isn't over." When Arthur arrived, he found Emma alone in the hallway. "He never told anyone he was in pain," she said quietly. "Not because he's stubborn, because he was scared of what a doctor's bill might do to us." Arthur sat down beside her, saying nothing for a long moment. "I built an empire," he finally said, "and I still couldn't see this coming." Marcus survived the initial episode, but the damage to his heart was significant. Doctors were blunt. With proper long-term care, medication, and reduced stress, he could live for many more years. Without it, his prognosis was uncertain at best. Arthur made a decision that afternoon. He instructed Diane to cover every medical cost Marcus would ever need, no matter what happened with the foundation position. Then he did something Preston never expected. He named Marcus as the new head of the Foundation's Community Health Initiative, not despite the collapse, but partly because of it. "You almost died proving a point you didn't even know you were making," Arthur told him at his bedside. "That the people this foundation is supposed to help are exactly the people the system keeps failing." Preston, humiliated, stormed out of the family meeting where the decision was announced, accusing his grandfather of choosing sentiment over qualifications. Arthur didn't argue. He simply said, "I've spent 40 years surrounded by people who were qualified. I finally found someone who was honest." For a few months, it seemed like a real ending, the kind viewers wanted. Marcus took the position from a hospital bed at first, then slowly returning to a modified schedule. He used part of his new salary to finally get Emma the ring he'd been saving for since before any of this began. He funded free cardiac screening days at 3 rural clinics in Ohio, the same kind of clinics that might have caught his own condition years earlier if he'd ever been able to walk through their doors without fear of the bill. But the human heart doesn't always follow the arc of a redemption story. 8 months after his first collapse, working late reviewing grant applications for a program to expand low-cost preventive care to uninsured workers just like the man he used to be, Marcus suffered a second cardiac event. This time, no one found him in time. He was 35 years old. Emma was the one who identified the moment something was wrong. A missed phone call, then another, then silence that stretched far too long. By the time paramedics broke down the door of his office, it was already over. Arthur Whitfield attended the funeral personally. He stood at the back, away from the cameras the Whitfield name usually attracted, and said nothing to reporters. Inside, he handed Emma an envelope. It wasn't money. It was a signed commitment to fund the very clinic expansion Marcus had been working on the night he died, permanently, in his name. Preston did not attend. The program Marcus built now screens thousands of uninsured workers every year for early signs of heart disease, the same condition that went unnoticed in him for over a decade because a doctor's visit once cost him $400 he didn't have. If this story reminded you that kindness and hard work don't always get the ending they deserve, but they still matter, comment the word "remembered" below. Arthur Whitfield never publicly explained why he chose to keep testing people the way he did after that, but those close to him say he never wore a nice coat to those tests again. He said the old Cadillac and the worn jacket weren't the disguise anymore. They were the point. Emma still works with the foundation today, keeping Marcus's program running exactly the way he designed it. No unnecessary paperwork. No shame, just care. Available to anyone who needs it, regardless of what they can afford. Sometimes the person the world overlooks is the only one paying attention. And sometimes, by the time everyone else finally sees it too, it's already too late to say thank you. Arthur Whitfield is 81 years old now. He still keeps the old Cadillac in his garage, though he no longer drives it on rainy nights looking for strangers to test. He says he found what he was looking for once, and it cost more than he was ever prepared to pay. When people ask him about the Foundation's health initiative, he doesn't talk about balance sheets or numbers reached. He talks about a man who stopped in the rain for someone who couldn't do anything for him in return, and who never once thought that decision would matter to anyone but a stranger he'd never see again. Preston, for his part, eventually left the family business altogether. Whether it was guilt, shame, or simply the discomfort of standing in a building named after a man he'd tried to destroy, no one at the Foundation ever asked, and he never explained. Emma kept Marcus's ring on a chain around her neck instead of her finger, because some promises don't need a ceremony to still count. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more stories like this coming, and some of them might hit even closer to home.